So thanks very much. Marguerite and I have worked together a bunch, and I'm really struck by a couple of things. One is she was known in the day as the Indiana Jones of school finance. And the notion that, that the aha that has happened is that a mathematician has basically, from what I can tell, embraced ethnography. I think I hear the sound of hell freezing over. But it's fascinating to kind of see to where we are. So as always, I thank you for your smarts and thank you for your candor in teeing this up, because I think that you've put a really fresh and interesting frame. I am your social chairman for the next 45 minutes. And so my primary way is to keep things moving and to hear from these terrific leaders and practitioners. For about 30 minutes or so, I've got a couple of questions for each of them, and then like we did before, we'll leave some time to bring the audience in for that. So, I mean, we really are looking to explore what these finance changes and the possibilities and flexibilities under ESSA would mean for from different leaders from different levels of the system. Should federal and state leaders really devolve these decisions down to the local or even school level? And so, in the spirit of specificity as a soul of credibility, we're going to get really concrete. So, Dr. Farabee, I'd like to start with you. So let's describe the autonomy initiative in Indianapolis. That seems sort of at its heart a sort of paradigm case of kind of what we're talking about, of bringing these decisions down to the local level.
Thank you. Happy to dive in. I think Arnie did a great job of framing the conversation of what school districts do really well when they have a focus. And for us, our focus has been on ensuring that we give our teachers and our educators the greatest autonomy. It's grounded in the philosophical imperative that if you hire excellent teachers and excellent school leaders, you get out of their way and you let them do their job. Why? Because they have the local context. They know their students, they know their families, they have the information to make informed decisions about teaching and learning. We also believe that this would empower greater teacher leadership and school leadership and extend the reach of our best teachers. We also believe that central services solely exist to serve schools and remove barriers to teaching and learning, not to create them. And so part of this challenge of us transition to greater school autonomy is also a transitional work of our central services team to ensure that they are truly a support and not creating additional layers of bureaucracy.
How's that gone? I mean, the bureaucracy part, because I'm going to go to the next question about sort of the roles. You're talking about the interplay of school to district. I also want to look to you, Stephen, about then the interplay of this kind of local level autonomy. What then becomes the role of the state, and how do you, if you have a challenge with sort of district bureaucracy, is there a potential tension with the state? So on the one hand, kind of getting out of the way, but on the other hand, a great deal more potential responsibility under ESSA.
Yeah, I'm reminded of something Dr. Farabee said, reminded me of when I first started teaching, my first full-time teaching job. I remember meeting with the principal, and he said, look, my sort of philosophy for the school is I hire the best people I can, I give them the resources they need, and I get out of their way. And so I think that the challenges for the states, and our organization represents the state commissioners of education that run the state education agencies. Our challenge is what is that, exploring what that role is. And I think, we just had a meeting of all of our members here a couple of weeks ago. For them, they're just really getting into what this new law means and trying to understand it and understand all the implications of it, what it allows them to do, what it requires them to do, what it's going to have them require that the districts do. So I think what we're hearing from our members is how do we support these kind of initiatives on the ground? How do we, to something that Marguerite, when you look at those graphics about those schools that are really producing tremendous outcomes with less resources, or maybe sometimes the same resources as other districts, how do we hold that up? How do we celebrate that? How do we put a magnifying glass on that and help scale those innovations across the whole state? That's the challenge I think our members are just starting to get into, is how do we leverage this new federal law to do just that, to figure out who's doing really great work in this space. How can we construct an SEA that traditionally has been very regulatory focused in a lot of instances. Certainly when I used to sit down, when I was the state chief in Maine for 2.5 years, and I would sit down with my federal programs team, and as far as they were concerned, this was what the law said, and they're just going to go do their thing. And you couldn't align all of that work around some kind of common vision. But I think that's what we're seeing our members start to be interested in.
So quick follow-up, are your members hearing from their legislators? Are they, I mean, I was at the meeting and it seemed, it's really complex. Clearly
Yeah.
people are still trying to get their arms around it. You could, add another layer of representative democracy to the mix in states. What's your sense of your members are legislators in or out or helping or hindering? What's your sense right now?
Well, I'll say this as a former legislator. Mostly hurting would be their inclination, I think, just because that's, as a legislator, I will tell you, the old joke is, and you guys have all heard it, when all you have is a hammer, every problem's a nail. And so when you're a legislator, you have legislation and rulemaking, and so the sort of sense from legislators is let's go solve these problems with more legislation. So we spend a lot of time working with our members on how are they communicating this, right? So they've got to learn what this new law allows them to do, how that's going to allow them to advance a vision for the state. They've got to then communicate that to stakeholders. They've got to work with stakeholders, communicate that with legislators, and kind of massage those relationships to move these things forward. So we're working with our members on that, but I mean, you're going to have, at least in my state, as I was listening to Marguerite this morning, I was thinking about school finance debates we used to have. And they were almost entirely disconnected from debates about outcomes for kids. Like the school finance discussion in my state was how much money does my district get? If you make this tweak to the finance law, will my district, if I'm a state legislator, is my legislative district going to get more money? We used to print these spreadsheets. We had our finance department printing spreadsheets and walking around the State House handing out spreadsheets. And legislators just want to know we're going to get more money or not. I'll support it if I get more money. If not, I mean, that discussion was completely disconnected from the student achievement discussion. So I think part of what this law may allow us to do is pull those discussions back together again. So we're really thinking about how those resources are used to improve student.
Well, I think this, that Marguerite's insight really is that that it really is. I mean, inside, it's not about money. It's about what you do with it. But it's actually not about money and not about what you do with it, but about something that's much more sort of idiosyncratic and local, and then getting much more specific about the nature of the transparency, right? Both, to your point, to outcomes and spending. So Emma, been a lot of controversy about the federal role. Both in terms of really, yeah,
just in education, right? Nowhere else.
Right, exactly. So, lots of controversy and arguments about that, and this ESSA was seen as that diminution of the federal role. So, what do you make of it? I mean, what's your sense of having been through those fights, been now through the the passage of the law, and now working on this in this sort of regulatory environment? Are you optimistic that that the law can now fuel these state and local innovation, and how are you thinking about how to be most helpful?
Sure. I think that we're definitely optimistic. I think ESSA carries a lot of opportunity at the state, local, and school level. I think it also carries a little bit of risk, and I think it's up to each of us at every level and those of us in this room to make sure the opportunity is maximized and the risks are mitigated. So I think it's just to take 1 second to remember why we have ESSA. So ESSA is the most recent version of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. The first ESEA was passed in 1965. It was a civil rights era law. So that's why this entire law exists, for an equity purpose. And that's why Title I exists and why these funds exist, to support students who have historically been underserved by our system. And I just think that's an important starting point. So I think ESSA provides a lot of opportunity at the state and local level, and I think it does so in terms of, it creates a smart framework around that for ensuring equity. So we can sort of talk through what some of the devolution changes are, right? There's more flexibility around how you spend dollars at the state, local, and school level, which I think is a good thing. But at the same time, it maintains requirements around where those dollars go and ensuring dollars are used to serve poor kids. There's more flexibility around what a state's vision of educational excellence is, and I think some of the chiefs are having great conversations around stepping back. We can look beyond test scores. What else is important in our state in terms of creating a real vision here? But at the same time, it says, but you should have an expectation of college and career-ready expectations for all your students, and that should be a big piece of how you define educational excellence. Are students actually learning towards those expectations? Are students graduating? It gives a lot more flexibility to states and districts around how you support your schools and how you intervene in schools that are really struggling, but it also says you have to intervene in schools that are really struggling. If a school's in the bottom 5% of your state, if more than a third of kids are dropping out of a high school, that's not okay, and the decision is yours how to change that, but something needs to be changed to serve those kids better. So I think there's a balancing there that I think definitely has real opportunity, but we need to make sure the sort of equity component of each of those is real as well in implementation.
So Scott, you're where the rubber meets the road. We've now talked about, you know, the law and the different levels of government and what that means and to evolve. And essentially, in a lot of ways, the baton is being passed to you. I mean, what's your sense? How do you think? How do you feel? What do you think principals will react? I mean, is this a good thing? Yay, bring it on, responsibility, or oh, what does this mean?
And you know, like most principals, I think the more control I have, the better. I think most principals certainly feel confident that they're the ones who know their school and school community the best. But you know, the comment was made, you know, if you have the right principals and right teachers in mind, the more autonomy you give them, the better. I mean, a rookie principal may not know all the things that they need to do or how to spend money the same way a veteran of a few years might. So there obviously needs to be some sort of that tight, loose control with the district. The other reality is that I often liken sort of the autonomy that we get as to sort of sending a kid into the dollar store, because there's certain things you always have to buy, right? And budgets, 98% of a budget or 97% of a budget is going to be on personnel. So after you buy all the things that you have to get, we get a little autonomy with what's left over. So it's like going to a dollar store, then you're given 79 cents. Like the fact that you can spend that 79 cents on anything you want doesn't really matter much because it's not going to go very far. And some budget years you have $1.79 and that's great, but so if you really want to have some dramatic effects, you have to be talking about some big autonomies and some big radical changes. And then that brings us to our next point with accountability, just how, I think school turnaround is really complicated work, and I think people expect that, okay, we have these inputs here and there's going to be these dramatic changes right away. And sometimes things happen over time. It was good to hear, a focus on things other than test scores as a sole measure. Obviously, they're going to be a huge measure, but not the sole measure. So you also have to think about sort of what are the leading indicators that show that a school or school district are turning things around and are making progress. And I think people underestimate how hard that work is, and that it's not always this sort of linear progression. There's steps forward and steps back. So it's complicated.
So do I take from your comment that flexibility and autonomy on personnel would be the most critical? That would be the most critical.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if it's not the programs, it's the people and it's the work. So yeah, autonomies around that would be great.
So let's go back to back to the superintendent. Are you worried that some schools will get worse with autonomy? And we said that it's about the people. You look at a scatter plot. Are you worried about that? And if so, what do you do if you get some that do great and some that do terrible with the autonomy? Then what happens?
Yeah, we worried about that, and we want to ensure that there are safeguards. I think Scott makes a great point that when we started the conversations around autonomy, there were principals who said, hey, I don't want to live in that world. I want to live in the world I am now. And so we've been very intentional about a phased approach. While we have a sense of urgency, we want to ensure that there are supports, professional development opportunities, and also we get it right in terms of how resources are allocated to the school. And so we're now transitioning to a student-based allocation model that would give greater flexibility. We opened the door for principals around hiring. So principals have carte blanche authority on the selection of their administrative team and their staff and the type of positions in their schools. So we know that we have to track with the appropriate case and cadence of change for central services to support principals in this new world of autonomy. And then also helping families understand what to expect from principals. I explain to principals all the time, when you're making those decisions now, don't make those decisions on an island, because you're going to need buy-in and ownership to support those decisions that you're making as it relates to how you allocate resources in your school. And so those are the types of things that we're helping develop with principals to ensure that they're able to be successful in this world of new autonomy.
So is that a fundamentally different pedigree, for principals? Or can you think that through training and professional development and some of the tools we're talking about here that you can, grow the talent? It sounds like it is a much more complicated job potentially with this kind of autonomy.
It is a much more complicated job because a lot of principals have maybe one course on school finance, if that, and now you're asking them to be responsible for all of their finances and we're opening the doors for some principals. If they want to handle school nutrition, if they want to handle their custodial work, their IT work, we want to give them that opportunity. But again, that's another layer of responsibility that they would have. But again, we want to ensure that they're prepared to do so. And I think we're one of the districts where we're extreme, where we hire the teachers for you. We hired your administrative team for you. Everybody just showed up on the front step. And now we're in a place where principals having to do all that themselves. And so we want to make sure that we, again, have the appropriate cadence and pace of change to support them accordingly.
Well, part of this is going to be, so not only do you have sort of a potentially different profile, a more complicated job, big emphasis in data, Emma, and particularly the financial data that's required, and the ambitious school report cards. Do you think these changes will ensure proper performance oversight? And can you talk a little bit about the school report cards in general,
Sure. So ESSA requires a lot of I shouldn't say a lot, ESSA requires some significant and probably pretty important new data reporting in terms of per pupil expenditures at the school level and various other sort of input related measures, as well as new reporting around college going and other various output related measures. So I think big picture, that should allow us to get a far broader sense of what Marguerite was saying, which is what are the inputs contributing to how schools are doing? What are the outcomes we care most about? How can we learn more in the hope that there is something to learn about how some of those inputs relate to some of those outcomes? And how can we get a better sense of how different schools are doing along those measures? So the law requires that states and districts put out a set of information for parents and communities and policymakers along a suite of measures. It maintains some of the old requirements around basic things like student learning, our kids graduating, et cetera, but also includes some of these new measures. In terms of performance oversight, I mean, I imagine all of us at every level would agree that data is necessary and not sufficient for any good performance oversight. I think it's really critical. I think one of the most exciting things in the law is actually around making this data public for parents and community members and policymakers to have a better sense. Right now, smart people like Marguerite can crunch all the data and have a real sense of how things are going, but it's far more difficult for a parent to know how many dollars are being spent on their kid, how many kids from their school go on to college. These are pretty useful things to know that at the parent level, most parents don't actually have access to at this time. But even that, unless states and districts, and I think this is really hard, and schools figure out how to make that accessible to parents who don't speak English, to all sorts of parents, even that's not going to necessarily live up to its true potential.
Yeah, I've been struck by the requirements of the report cards. And I mean, I think a CCSSO document said that in one case, if you disaggregate everything, it's like 300,000 indicators. And so the sort of following up the question that I asked the secretary, which is how do you make this digestible? How do you make it actionable? 300,000 indicators are probably not going to be actionable. How do you get to simpler ones? And so how do we think about report cards? I mean, this, you deal most with parents and most with the community. Have you thought about, one, how you engage on this question of report cards, and two, the sense of within the school, if you actually have more autonomy around staffing and more autonomy around money, how does that change, your job or potentially the culture of the school?
I don't know the answer about the report cards because ultimately that gets filtered through the district office, right? And I do forget that, working for DC Public Schools, like DC's done a great job of really implementing a lot of the kinds of reforms around autonomy. So for a number of years now, I've had autonomy in terms of hiring and a pretty robust evaluation system that if people are not doing their job, that there is some teeth to it that, you can exit out folks that aren't really good for kids. And what that brings is a sense of accountability. No principal is going to want to be running a school where they don't have a high degree of saying over staffing. I mean, that's, those are your folks. Those are the people that you are fighting for kids with, and you definitely want to have the people on board that ship that are the right folks. And so, there, at the very least around sort of staffing, there needs to be a high degree of autonomy there.
Great. So, Stephen, what other pressures are on states? Right, we now hearing through it, are on states. I mean, again, having been at your meeting, I was struck by the sheer volume of stuff, of PowerPoints, of of perspectives, of indicators, of competing demands. I mean, personalized learning, performance, bailouts, turnarounds. You know, how are you guys, you personally, your organization, how are you beginning, you're hearing my hobby horse of simplification, or at least bringing some order to help states sort of work through this?
Yeah, we've been working around the clock just to get as much information as we can, and you saw it at the meeting, the number of stuff that we were able to generate, working with a lot of partners, including the department, to get as much information into the hands of our members as we could and get them to sort of start digesting all of this. I think one of the things that we realized early on is we couldn't just bury them in all of that. And so we kind of built this hierarchical structure in terms of the way we did our documentation, where we did have, we had built, and you can go on the website and find these specialized documents for each of these content areas. So states are interested in innovative assessment pilots. So we had to do some pieces around, well, what does that mean? And what do you need to do to get one? And what do you need it for? And we would do those, but at the top of it, we put what we call the state strategic vision document. And what we implored our members to do is, before you get down in the weeds, start with, to your point, with the secretary, what are the 2 or 3 key things you're trying to achieve? Like, use this, don't get rolled over by this law, and don't just hand the law off to your accountability people and just say, go take care of it. Use the law as an opportunity to advance the vision that you have for your kids. So figure out what are the biggest challenges that you're confronting? What are those 2 or 3 things that if you moved those levers would have the biggest impact on outcomes for kids? And I think for most of our members, it is closing those kind of persistent achievement gaps. That despite all the work under NCLB and really looking at data on subgroups for the first time and all the work that was put into that, we've still got these huge yawning gaps in achievement. And so what we've asked our members to try to do is sit down with your leadership team, sit down with your stakeholders, your parents, all the organizations that you work with, your superintendents, your building principals, the associations, and start to develop kind of a statewide vision of where we want to go with this thing. And then figure out how to leverage ESSA to accomplish that goal. Not the reverse, which is, well, ESSA makes us do this, so I guess we better do it. But instead, set out what those goals are and then engineer it from there. And so our thing, what we've planned out is being able to go into the states, sit down with them, help them navigate through that, think about what those core goals are, and then helping them then go down into the weeds on each of those pieces and make sure those are aligned to that overall goal. Because it's, when you're in an SEA, everybody's, my SEA, I was in Maine, the department had 150 people in it. And so it was very flat and very thin. I mean, there just wasn't a lot of there. And so people were going off in different directions, and you had to really work to get people focused in one direction. So we're going to, that's the kind of support we want to provide our members, is start with what you're trying to achieve, and then we'll help you, and we'll work with all our partner organizations to figure out how to help you align all of these, including the finance piece, to those ends.
So before I turn it over, one last over to questions, so get your questions ready. Just a sort of sort of more open-ended, I'm going to ask you to sort of answer from your perspective, right? The country spends on average about $13,000 per student. We've talked about different ways of how do we think we can get more. The premise of this panel and this notion is that it could be pretty different depending on where you sit, whether that's at any one of these chairs or even in a different school. From your perspective, what excites you, or you can be excited or worried. Actually, you can even be both. From where you sit, about sort of the opportunity before us that all of this sort of ESSA flexibility provides. Want to go first?
Sure. By proximity. I always try to be hopeful. When people look at the per pupil spending numbers, they're always sort of amazed that, that doesn't buy you better results. I've been principal in DC of 2 schools. One was a high-performing school that was a higher SES, and I felt like the money that we were given was more than suitable for the job. In the last 8 years, I've been at a high-poverty school that we restructured through No Child Left Behind, and I've never once felt like we got enough money. Mm-hmm. So part of it depends on the challenge that's right there in front of you. It's exciting that there'll be more flexibility. Again, I think that flexibility and autonomy are going to be key to making big improvements. It makes me a little nervous that there'll be so many indicators, because you really do need to, focus down on the few big levers that are going to make things happen better. But, hopeful. we're getting smart about school.
Yeah, I'm optimistic as well. I just believe we have to get public education right. And for me, one of the things that excites me is we're beginning to have conversation about rethinking assessment and testing. And so when I think about what we spend in our state and our school district and at the school level on assessment and testing, if we can achieve greater brevity in assessment and testing, I believe we can redirect those resources to the classroom. I'm also excited that nationally, and particularly in our district, we have redesigned teacher compensation. So we had a lot of conversation around, well, most of your dollars in personnel. And so we've transformed our compensation model. We have a unique collective bargaining agreement. We no longer compensate for education, and there's clear research around education. We no longer compensate based on years of experience. We compensate based on years of effectiveness, which is tied to our teacher evaluation model. We also are differentiating instruction and pay based on hard-to-fill areas and the needs of our students. And so I'm excited that that level of change is taking place in our district. And I'm also excited that many school districts like ours are beginning to recognize the need to maximize your talent within the district. And so if we can capitalize on the talent within our districts, I think our dollars will go further, and we can extend the reach of our best teachers and school leaders.
I'm optimistic as well, though that's not in my nature. And for the reasons that we just heard, which is, anytime we travel out to the States, and I used to do this when people came to visit us at the department, we didn't hang around in the department. We went out to schools and districts that were doing innovative things, and we tried to spend as much time talking about what was going on and learning about what was going on. So the flexibility and autonomy pieces are really exciting. But it's a double-edged sword, right? And I think the worry for us as an organization is, to some degree, we're like the dog that finally caught the car, right? So for years, we at the state level have been hounding our friends in Washington about give us more flexibility, give us more, let us do our thing. We know how to do this. You don't need to, and so finally they said, okay, here it is.
To which the CCSSO meeting said, what?
Yes, yeah. I mean, and so it's sort of like, okay, go do it. You've told us you can do it. Go do it. And so that really has put the onus back on the states. And part of us is like, that's great. That's what we've been waiting for. But part of us, like, you know what? If we don't do this right, because this was not without controversy, right, devolving these responsibilities back to the state. A lot of people in this city are not crazy about that idea and worried that the states, if given this flexibility, would do the wrong thing for kids. So, our worry is if our members don't get this right, the next iteration of this law will be a reversal back in the direction that we were going, which is a heavier federal role. And, here in Washington, them saying, look, we gave you a chance. We gave you the flexibility, and look what happened. So there's a lot of pressure there to make sure that we deliver. But it's exciting, but it's daunting as well.
Emma, what do you think from your federal seat?
I think I am cautiously optimistic. As I laid out at the beginning, I do think at every level, putting the kids who need the most first is going to need to be central to a lot of these decisions to feel like this law and these autonomies are really delivering on the promise of the federal law. I think the other thing I would say is just, and I think you would say this as well, there is a moment here. We've had a lot of change in education over the past 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And now we're going to have a lot more change. And hopefully it's all for the better. But I do think there's also a little fatigue going on. And I worry about this moment of great opportunity being wasted to the fatigue that is currently going on. And instead of people using this opportunity to really step back and set a vision, they will tweak around the edges. So I see all the incoming questions we get on ESEA from states, districts, principals. And the first round were all these very, very micro questions. Following the CCSSO convening, there were more bigger vision questions. But I do think there's, well done. Yeah. But I do think there's a real question about whether people will actually use this moment to do some hard things. I think we know more than we did about some things that work in education. That doesn't mean they work all the time. Education is an implementation business. But we do know some things that work, but they're largely not the easiest things. If they were, we would have done them. So high quality pre-K works, but it costs money, right? We know more about how small schools work or socioeconomically diverse schools work, but those are challenging things to take on. We know that investing in great talent in our very highest need schools in particular is a really critical thing to do. Great principal, great teachers, kids are going to get served well. We all know that, but that's also a hard thing to do. So using this moment and these flexibilities to actually take on some of the tougher changes and deliver on what we know works for kids, as opposed to sort of tweaking around the edges because that's the easier path, I think is a real question.
Terrific. I'd like to be able to open it up to the audience here. Any yes, questions up here? Let's start here, and then we'll go there.
Thank you.
Please let us know your name.
Sure. Okay, my name's Daniel Thatcher. When in 1973, when the San Antonio v. Rodriguez court recognized that there's not a right to federal education guaranteed under the federal Constitution, he said that the ultimate solutions must come from the lawmakers and the democratic pressures that elect them. Now, given the fact that that is the structure, the governance structure in the United States, that our state legislatures, and that's who Justice Powell was referring to when he said that, they oversee at least 45% of the money that's spent, and probably more because they dictate to the locals how to raise it, and also through their finance formulas. What I'm hearing is that legislators only care about how much money they're getting. That seems very anti-democratic to me. If that's our structure that we have, is that we have to engage them. And we saw what happened with the Common Core when we didn't engage legislators. When they were left out of the loop, bad things happened. So my question is, if you had, and you have to, engage the legislature on this question, how to leverage the school effects to better to get improvements in our school, in school achievement, what conversations do you need to have with them? What do you want from them?
That's a great question. Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to make something a legislative issue? Say that's not a legislative issue in the presence of a legislator. Am I right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, let me clarify what I was saying. I can't tell you how much time as a state chief I spent sitting in front of the legislature. I mean, it was a constant effort to work with the legislature around different policy things. My comment earlier was about the school finance discussion. Too many times was separate from the what are we doing for kids discussion. You didn't have bills. They weren't contemplating bills that linked those things. So you would go down and have a discussion about the school finance law and where the money was going, and that discussion was kind of over here. And then there was this other discussion that too often I felt was disconnected from that discussion. And I think it's because there really wasn't a lot of, there weren't a lot of resources, and this goes to the new data collection we're going to be doing around per pupil spending. You're going to all of a sudden have an influx of a massive amount of information about where this money's going that we didn't have before. I mean, I remember sitting in front of our education committee. We have one joint committee between the two houses in Maine. And we were talking about school finance and our school finance law, which is built around all these very complicated formulas about what you should be spending on your special ed kids and all this. And one of the legislators said, well, they're going to spend it the way the formula says, right? It's like, no, they're not. The formula generates an amount, and then we just send them a check. And they spend it however and they were floored by this. And so that was really the only time I can think in 2.5 years working with the legislature that we really started talking about where is that money going. So I think we're going to introduce a whole new discussion. To your question about how do you leverage this, I think it still goes back to the 2 or 3 things. And I think the success, if I had any success with my legislature, it was when we, as a department, really honed in on what are those things we're trying to achieve, what are those core goals. And we spent enough time doing that I had a couple of members of the legislative committee who had our sort of strategic plan document with them. And they used it as a screener for legislation. And they would say, if this bill is related to us advancing this agenda, we're going to work on it. And if it's not, we're going to move it out. Because they were just awash in bills every year that they had to kind of plow through. And part of their job as a legislative committee was getting that 160 bills a session down to what are these 6 or 8 bills that are actually going to move the needle. So we spent a lot of time talking with our members about engaging the legislature. How do you work with them to get them pointed so you're all kind of pointed in the same direction? So I don't want to underplay the role of the legislature. It's key, and getting that alignment is a huge ongoing piece of work.
Terrific. Other questions? There, yes. Oh, wait here. Okay, I'm sorry. Just let's go here and then over. Sorry, sorry. I just had promised there, so let's go 1, 2, 3. Yes.
Yes, my name is Ndaba. I'm with the Wesley Institute of Justice and Peace. I've heard today, all the research comes right down to behavior, not how much you spend on the students, not even both schools system have the same system. It's based upon behavior, how you relate to the students and how you treat the student. So I think I think it's very important to have this discussion about racism, white supremacy. And the reason why is that we got to have that discussion is that if we do not have the discussion of racism, white supremacy, and your role in maintaining the system, then we're just pretending and trying to help the student achieve. Because everything is based upon the treatment of student and how people perceive how students are or should be treated. So we have to have that discussion instead of going around the edges. We got to have a direct discussion because you're impacting the lives and the future of students, as well as the legislators. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Next, I know we had one over here. Yes, yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Jason Botel with 50 Can. My question is, I really appreciated the conversation about, as you're doing in Indianapolis, giving teachers and principals autonomy and then getting out of their way. My question is this, though. Do you think it's enough when you create a space for that autonomy, as was discussed, some principals are equipped to take that autonomy and get great outcomes. Some principals are not. But if we make the position like that, is that enough to attract the talent that's needed to make best use of it? Or are we going to need to invest heavily in recruiting the right talent and professional development? And if it's the latter, it seems to me there's a tension between the money you invest there and the money you want to get out to your schools. And I'm just wondering, where's the line there? How do you make sure there's enough money going to principals like our principal here to do right by kids while we're also making the long-term investments to get the most effective principals who are invested in race equity and in sound instructional practice?
Dr. Fairby, you want to start? You sort of have touched on that. You want to come back?
I was be happy to start. As a former principal, I just firmly believe that great teachers are attracted to great leaders. And when we survey our teachers, at the top of the list is their school leadership and opportunity to grow and develop an organization. And so we've been very intentional of creating a pipeline for teachers to exercise their leadership and those that not interested in necessarily being a principal. And creating this philosophy that school leadership doesn't have to come solely from the principal's office. And helping our principals understand that so they're empowering the people in their organization. If we rely solely on district recruitment and retention efforts, we will not be where we need to be. That's the work of the principals. And as the principal, I ensure that I embrace that responsibility. And we've got to ensure that we hire great principals that also embrace that responsibility.
So Scott, as you look across your colleagues, how would you add to that, if at all?
Well, I think the piece that was also brought up is not just the recruitment piece, but also the ongoing training. I think that principal training and professional development is not something that a lot of districts do very well. So I think investing in principals that way, the same way we invest in teachers, is key. And again, I think also having that sort of tight loose of establishing what autonomies are. I really don't want the autonomy of hiring a cafeteria staff. That would I have enough to do, right? I'd say no, I don't want that autonomy. So having an agreement with the district about what autonomies principals do and don't have, and then what the expectations and outcomes are, and measuring those is
And can I just add that in our district, we have the spectrum. So for those individuals that want to push to the edge of autonomy, we give them that opportunity, but that's not a mandate. Right. And I think that's how you manage the responsibilities and the development opportunities that you're
So it's almost going back to the scatter plot, that it isn't the same autonomy for every principal or every school. You're being quite intentional and idiosyncratic. I want a happier word than that, but unique to the school environment space and that principal's skill and experience.
Right. And there's this great role that the district has to play regardless of the amount of autonomies in terms of helping schools understand sort of the resource. I mean, we're in an increasingly technological age where, you know, personalized learning is doing some great things, but I don't have the time to vet 50 different, you know, English language arts software programs, whereas somebody who's, you know, whose sole job in the central office to do that is, but I can take the recommendation and then implement those things. So, you know, it can't be this wide open, the principal's making every decision,
But the key
it
is
needs
to
some
focus
support.
on which
Exactly.
ones.
Yeah.
So we have time for one more question. Oh, yeah.
Me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
Hi.
No, it is a little bit, yeah.
Jane Hanaway, the McCourt School. One thing that I have found surprising, both in this panel and the earlier panel, is the absence of much discussion about teachers. I think the superintendent from Indianapolis is an exception here. And if you go back to the data that has been amassed over the last decade that really gives us insight into what matters, it's the teacher. And the variation within school is as much as the variation between schools. So you know, why aren't we dealing with this? We've got the findings, they're slam dunk. It's everyone's intuition that has spent a lot of time in schools, and yet the policies emerging on what we can do seem to be losing steam. With the exception of Indianapolis.
I mean, are you asking?
I-
Go ahead.
Just quickly, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I would hate for folks to leave here with the idea that because it just hasn't come up, that this isn't a priority, at least for our members. So I'll just speak for our members. This is and so is the school leadership thing, a huge priority for our states. And I represented a rural state. Our largest school district in Maine has 6,000 kids in it. Not 60,000, not 16,000, 6,000. So we have tiny, tiny school districts with not a lot of resources, even if we were to give them these kind of flexibility. So the state our members are increasingly looking at what are we doing to support teacher development in the states. We have a whole unit of our organization that works on nothing but that. And I will tell you, for all the talk about ESSA at our last meeting that we had 2 weeks ago, because it was kind of the issue du jour, when we got our members behind closed doors and talked to them about what are your priorities coming up for the year, teacher recruitment and retention was item number one. In fact, we're going to do a carve out at our next meeting this summer specifically around that, because the chiefs came to us and said, we've got a calamity, a crisis, and especially in some of our states out west, some of the rural states, they are facing very, very dire prognosis in terms of the teachers that they have, the teachers leaving the workforce, not able to recruit new teachers, and school leaders, by the way. So it's a huge issue. It is something that our organization spends a ton of time working on it. So I'm glad you brought it up, because we are working on it.
Yes.
I mentioned it briefly at the end when I was talking about how I'm worried that we won't take on some of the hard things,
Yeah.
and that's exactly the kind of thing I meant. I mean, I think figuring out how we better recruit, prepare, develop, retain truly excellent teachers and principals, particularly in our highest need schools, is sort of the core work. And I am worried that with some of the conversation around what's the new accountability system, what are the new data metrics,
Right.
how do we make a report card with many
11,000
thousands of data
indicators.
points.
Yeah, right.
We're going to lose sight of that, which I do think is pretty core to the work we are all trying to do. I'm glad to hear that at the meeting it's still a focus for chiefs, but I'm worried that some of the focus we've gotten is going to dissipate with all the other change and new conversation going on.
No, I think that's an excellent point. I think we used euphemisms, personnel, talent, things like that. I do think the question of fatigue, there is a great deal of fatigue around sort of teacher evaluation and so forth. That's been probably the most politically intensive the last little while. But I think we're going to end kind of where we started, where the mathematician found out that it really was all about people and not about numbers. Okay, a little bit about numbers, a little bit. And so I really sort of hear sort of thematically that the notion of people, it's also to simplify and to focus. And whether that's about people who are teachers or people who are principals or people in roles that are represented up here, or communities and parents, that being able to simplify that allows them to engage better, and a real focus. The second is this notion of talent, greater demands, an upgrade, not in a sense because they're not good, but because the responsibilities now that we're talking about under this new law, particularly in leadership roles, are much more complicated and in some cases very different. And so what does that mean for for training and professional development. The notion of really considering funding together with outcomes. I mean, I was struck, I worked on school finance in Texas, and same thing, right? How much do we get, as opposed to, what are we spending on it? How do we decide? How do we explain that? And then the sort of tools, not only to help, leaders in these more complicated roles be able to think that way, but also then help them be able to communicate in a new and more robust way with whether it's legislators or stakeholders or parents. And so I'd like to thank our panel. Terrific discussion. Really appreciate it. Audience, if you would please join me in thanking our folks here. And thank you for your time.
I'll reiterate that thanks and to Stephanie and the entire panel for coming in and sharing these ideas. They're thorny and messy, and they overlap with just about everything. I'll also say that, lest you think I've given up on data, there's no chance. Data even matters more now that we've invited in all of this human element, I think. But thank you all for spending a lunch for today with us talking about education finance, and I'll be around for a while after, and join in with me when thanking for this panel. Thanks so much.